At exactly 2:30 in the morning, while you were asleep, while your family was asleep, while most of America had no idea what was about to change, a man sitting inside a private club in Palm Beach, Florida, made a decision that will be studied in history books for decades. He didn't make that decision from the Oval Office. He didn't make it from the Situation Room beneath the West Wing, the room that was literally built for moments exactly like this one. He made it from Mar-a-Lago, his golf resort, his private members club, where people pay up to $500,000 for access. And at 2:30 a.m., from inside that building, President Donald Trump authorized a joint United States and Israeli military operation against the sovereign nation of Iran, one of the most heavily armed, most geopolitically significant countries in the Middle East, and posted a video about it on Truth Social. Now, before you decide how you feel about that, before you cheer or before you recoil, I need you to sit with one question. Does it matter where a president launches a war? Because the answer to that question tells you everything about how power actually works in this country. And the answer is more complicated, more layered, and more important than anyone in mainstream media is currently willing to tell you. If you've been watching the news all morning and you're still not sure what to think, if every channel you turn to is either celebrating or catastrophizing and nobody is just explaining, that is exactly what this channel is here for. Senate Decode exists because the most important questions are usually the ones nobody is asking out loud. We ask them here every week in plain English. Hit subscribe right now because this story is not over and you deserve to understand every chapter of it as it unfolds. Let's get into it. Let's paint the picture clearly because the details here matter more than most people realize. It's the early hours of Saturday, February 28th, 2026. President Trump is not in Washington. He's in Palm Beach, Florida, at Mar-a-Lago, the oceanfront estate he converted into a private club and has used repeatedly as what he calls the Winter White House. Alongside him, according to White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, are members of his national security team. We don't know exactly who was in that room. We don't know which generals, which advisors, which intelligence officials were physically present versus patched in remotely. What we know is that Leavitt confirmed the president monitored the situation overnight at Mar-a-Lago, and that at 2:30 a.m., he recorded a video on Truth Social announcing that the United States had launched what he called major combat operations against Iran. In that video, Trump was standing at a podium. He was wearing a Navy suit and a baseball cap with USA on it, and he looked directly into the camera and told the Iranian people, not the American people, not Congress, not the United Nations, but the Iranian people, that the hour of your freedom is at hand. He told them to stay in their homes because bombs would be dropping. He told them that when it was over, they should take over their government. He said, and I want you to hear these exact words, this will be probably your only chance for generations. And then he told them something that no American president has ever said publicly, in quite this way, in quite this moment. For many years, you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. No president was willing to do what I am willing to do tonight. That is an extraordinary statement, delivered from a private resort at 2:30 in the morning while the bombs were already falling. Now let's talk about the optics, because I know some of you are already thinking, who cares where he was? The decision is the decision. The bombs are the bombs. Does geography really matter? And the answer is yes, more than you might expect, but not necessarily for the reasons you might assume. Here's the thing about the Situation Room. It is not just a room, it is a symbol. It was created after the Bay of Pigs, after one of the most catastrophic military intelligence failures in American history, specifically because President Kennedy wanted a dedicated, secure, fully equipped command center inside the White House that could handle the most sensitive national security decisions in real time. Since then, every major American military operation, every president ordering strikes, every crisis response, every moment where the weight of command has to be felt in the room has traditionally happened there, or at least in a comparable secure facility. The Situation Room is classified. It is swept for surveillance. It is built to ensure that the most sensitive conversations about the most sensitive operations cannot be intercepted, leaked, or compromised. Mar-a-Lago is a private club. It has hundreds of members who pay for access. It has staff, guests, and visitors who cycle through constantly. It has, in the past, raised serious questions from national security experts about the security of sensitive conversations held within its walls. And I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying that Trump made a wrong decision by being at Mar-a-Lago. I am not saying the operation was compromised. What I'm saying is that the choice of location raises legitimate, serious questions that deserve serious answers. And the fact that almost nobody in mainstream political media is asking those questions right now, in the heat of a breaking military operation, is itself a story worth telling. Because the location of power is always a statement about the nature of power. When a president governs from a private club, a place with his name on the gate, a place where members have paid to be near him, that is a different kind of presidency than one that operates entirely from the public institutions built for exactly this purpose. Let's talk about the chain of command because this is where the substance gets really important. White House Press Secretary Leavitt confirmed that Trump was with members of his national security team. She confirmed that Secretary of State Marco Rubio had called all 8 members of the Gang of Eight, the bipartisan group of congressional intelligence leaders who are legally entitled to be notified of major covert and military operations before the strikes began. Rubio reached 7 of the 8. One member was not reached before the operation launched. Now, there are 2 ways to read that. The charitable reading is that this was an extraordinarily time-sensitive operation, that military windows open and close quickly, and that attempting to reach all 8 members of a bipartisan committee while also coordinating with Israel's military in real time is genuinely difficult. That is a fair point. The less charitable reading is that congressional notification, even the limited notification the Gang of Eight represents, is not just a courtesy, it is a legal requirement. The Intelligence Authorization Act requires the president to keep the Gang of Eight fully and currently informed of intelligence activities and covert actions. And when one of those 8 members can't be reached and the bombs drop anyway, that is a gap in the legal process that deserves scrutiny. Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee and therefore one of the 8, made his position crystal clear after he was briefed. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that everything he heard from the administration confirmed this was a war of choice with no strategic endgame. He said military action in this region almost never ends well for the United States. He said it can spiral and escalate in ways that cannot be anticipated. And he said it does not appear that Donald Trump has learned the lessons of history. That is a devastating statement, and it came from someone who was actually in the briefing. Now, is Himes right? That's a separate question, and a genuinely difficult one. There are smart people on both sides of that debate, but the fact that a member of the Gang of Eight, someone with access to intelligence the public doesn't have, walked out of that briefing and said what he said should make every single one of us pay close attention to what happens next. Let's go back to that Truth Social video because I think it is one of the most remarkable pieces of presidential communication in modern American history, Wayne, and I mean that in a way that is genuinely complicated. Trump didn't just announce the strikes. He gave a speech directly to the people of Iran. He told them to stay in their homes because it was dangerous outside. He told them bombs would be dropping everywhere. He told them that when the operation was finished, it would be their moment, their chance to take over their own government. Think about what that is. That is an American president in the middle of an active military operation, publicly calling for the overthrow of a foreign government and directing his message not to the regime, but to the civilians living under it. There is a version of that which is deeply humanitarian. There is a version of that which recognizes the genuine suffering of the Iranian people under a regime that has brutalized them for decades, that has shot protesters in the streets, that has imprisoned journalists, that has executed dissidents, that has spent its nation's wealth funding terrorist proxies across the region while its own people struggled with crushing poverty and international isolation. The Iranian people did not choose this regime. Many of them despise it. And there are reports, credible, documented reports from multiple sources of Iranian citizens inside the country celebrating the strikes, laughing, cheering, filming themselves as they heard explosions near the Supreme Leader's compound and expressing joy, not grief. That context matters enormously, and it does not get enough attention in the American media, which tends to treat strikes on Iran as synonymous with war on the Iranian people, when the distinction between a regime and its population is actually one of the most morally important distinctions you can make. But here is the other version of what Trump did. He told millions of civilians, people in apartment buildings, people in hospitals, people with children, that bombs would be dropping everywhere and told them to stay inside. He publicly broadcast the timing and nature of an active military operation. He essentially called for revolution in real time without any clear plan for what happens after that revolution, who leads it, how it gets organized, or what the United States would do to support or protect the people he was asking to rise up. And he did all of this from Mar-a-Lago on Truth Social at 2:30 in the morning. Let's spend some time on the Gang of Eight because this is where the constitutional mechanics of this moment get really important and really underreported. Most Americans don't know what the Gang of Eight is, and that's not their fault. It's a deliberately obscure part of the national security architecture that Washington generally prefers to keep out of public conversation. So here's what you need to know. The Gang of Eight is a group of 8 congressional leaders, specifically the majority and minority leaders of both the House and the Senate, plus the chairs and ranking members of both chambers' intelligence committees. They are the only members of Congress who are legally entitled to be briefed on the most sensitive covert operations and national security activities of the United States government. The idea behind the Gang of Eight is that even in a democracy, even when secrecy is essential to the success of an operation, there needs to be some congressional oversight. There needs to be at least a small group of elected representatives who know what the executive branch is doing with American military power, even if the full Congress cannot be informed. That's the theory. The reality is more complicated. Because the Gang of Eight doesn't vote on operations. They can't stop them. They can't publicly criticize them without risking violation of classification rules. In practice, the Gang of Eight briefing has sometimes functioned less as genuine oversight and more as legal cover, a way for the executive branch to say Congress was informed while Congress had no real power to respond. And that's exactly what we're seeing play out right now. Rubio called them. He reached 7 out of 8. They were briefed. And then the operation happened regardless of what any of them thought about it. Jim Himes said it was a war of choice with no strategic endgame, and the strikes happened anyway. Now, you can agree with Trump's decision. You can believe that Iran posed a genuine imminent threat that required exactly this kind of action. You can believe that congressional approval in advance would have been impossible in a time-sensitive military window. All of those arguments exist, and they are not without merit. But what you should not do is pretend that everything is working exactly as the founders intended when the legislative branch is being notified rather than consulted, briefed rather than authorized, and informed after the fact rather than empowered to check the decision before it was made. This is a constitutional tension that has been building for decades, through Iraq, through Afghanistan, through Syria, through a dozen other military actions. And Operation Epic Fury is simply the latest chapter in a very long story about who, in America, actually decides to go to war. Let's take a step back and look at the historical record because context here is everything. Presidents have always had the authority to respond to imminent threats with military force without prior congressional approval. That authority is real, it is established, and it has been exercised by presidents of both parties for generations. But there is a difference between responding to an imminent attack and initiating a major offensive operation aimed at regime change. When the United States launched the operation that killed Osama bin Laden, President Obama was in the Situation Room. There are famous photographs of that moment, of Obama surrounded by his national security team, watching in real time as the mission unfolded. That imagery became one of the most powerful visual symbols of American leadership in the 21st century. When the United States launched the strikes that killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, Trump was notified and approved the strike through secure channels. When the United States launched Operation Midnight Hammer last year, the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, the operation was conducted with a degree of process and preparation that at least gestured toward institutional norms. And now, Operation Epic Fury, arguably the most expansive American military action against Iran in history, one that includes the explicit goal of regime change, was overseen from a private resort, announced on social media, and communicated to the Iranian public in a pre-dawn video posted before most Americans were awake. That is a different way of doing things. I'm not telling you it's wrong. I'm telling you it's different. And in a democracy, different is always worth examining because the norms and processes and institutions we maintain aren't just bureaucratic red tape. They are the architecture of accountability. And when that architecture changes, when it erodes piece by piece, administration by administration, the change is almost never visible until it's already complete. Let's talk about what Trump actually communicated in that early morning video and what he chose to leave out. He told the Iranian people that the United States was launching a massive and ongoing military operation. He said the goal was to destroy Iran's missiles and raise its missile industry. He said the United States would annihilate Iran's navy. He called on members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to lay down their arms in exchange for immunity, warning that refusal would mean certain death. That's what he said. Here's what he didn't say. He didn't lay out a specific diplomatic off-ramp. He didn't articulate what a ceasefire would look like or what conditions Iran would need to meet to end the strikes. He didn't address what happens if the regime survives, if Khamenei is still alive, if the IRGC holds together, if Iran retaliates in ways that draw American forces into a broader regional conflict. He didn't explain what the United States would do to support an Iranian uprising if one actually materialized. He didn't address the question of who governs Iran in the aftermath if regime change actually succeeds, a question that experts on Iran have been asking frantically since the strikes began because there is no obvious answer. And Congressman Himes put his finger on exactly this gap when he said that everything he heard from the administration confirmed there was no strategic endgame. Military power without a political strategy is how wars start. It is not how they end. And right now, sitting in the most powerful office in the world, operating from a private club in Florida at 2:30 in the morning, the President of the United States has launched an operation whose military objectives are clear and whose political endgame is not. That is not a political attack. That is an observation, and it is the single most important thing you need to understand about this moment. Let's bring this home. Let's talk about what this means for you, not as a Republican or a Democrat, not as a hawk or a dove, but as an American citizen who lives in a country that just entered a military conflict with one of the most significant nations in the Middle East. First, the immediate military situation. Iran has already retaliated. Missiles were fired at American military bases across the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes, has reportedly been closed. Oil prices are going to move when markets open. Shipping prices are going to move. The global economic ripple effects of this operation are already in motion, and they will touch your life whether you're paying attention to foreign policy or not. Second, the congressional debate. The Gang of Eight was notified, but notification is not authorization. The War Powers Resolution gives Congress a role in extended military operations. It requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing forces, and it limits unauthorized military engagement to 60 days. What happens if this operation extends beyond that window? What happens if Congress demands a vote and the administration refuses? That fight is coming. It may already be starting. Third, the question of escalation. Iran has attacked American bases in response. It has fired missiles at multiple countries in the region. Multiple U.S. allies are now navigating how to respond, whether to support the operation, and how to protect their own people and interests from Iranian retaliation. The Houthis in Yemen have announced they will resume strikes on Red Sea shipping. This conflict has the potential to expand in multiple directions simultaneously. And fourth, the question that nobody wants to ask out loud, but everybody needs to start thinking about. What does it mean for American democracy when decisions of this magnitude, decisions that will affect the lives of American service members, American families, American consumers, and millions of people around the world, are made in a private club in Palm Beach, announced on a social media platform, and presented to Congress as a fait accompli? That question does not have an easy answer. It does not break neatly along party lines. It is a question about the architecture of American power, about where decisions get made, who gets to make them, and what accountability looks like in the 21st century. Here is what I want you to take away from this video. The story is not simply that Trump bombed Iran. The story is that the President of the United States launched one of the most significant military operations in a generation from a private resort at 2:30 in the morning, announced it on social media, addressed to foreign people directly, called for their government to be overthrown, and did all of it while the Gang of Eight, the only congressional body even entitled to be briefed, was split down the middle about whether it was the right call. You can support the operation and still ask those questions. You can believe Iran needed to be confronted and still want to understand the process by which that confrontation was decided. You can be proud of the American military and still demand that the decisions made in their name go through the institutions and the safeguards that exist precisely to protect them and to protect you. Because here's the truth that gets lost in every breaking news cycle. The decisions your government makes in moments of crisis shape the kind of country you live in long after the crisis is over. The norms that get bent, the processes that get skipped, the institutions that get bypassed, they don't always spring back into shape when the emergency passes. Sometimes they just stay bent. And the only way to prevent that, the only real check on executive power that has ever worked in American history, is an informed public that refuses to stop asking questions just because the bombs make the questions feel uncomfortable. That is what we do here. That is what Senate Decode is for. If this video helped you understand something you didn't understand before, share it right now. Send it to someone who's been watching the news all day and still isn't sure what to think. Drop a comment and tell me what questions you're still sitting with, because I want to know what you need answered. And if you're not subscribed yet, I'll say it one more time. This story is not over, not by a long shot, and you deserve to understand every chapter as it unfolds, in plain language, without the spin. This is Senate Decode. I'll see you in the next one.